Ever get that feeling? Like there's this constant chatter in the back of your mind.
You mean that voice that's always narrating your day, critiquing everything?
Exactly. And it's funny because most of us kind of just accept it. We don't even realize how much it's actually affecting us.
Yeah, it's almost like this hidden force
Mm.
shaping how we see the world, even how we feel about ourselves.
So that's exactly what we're digging into today. The story of Dan Harris, this network news guy who, from the outside, had it all. Big career, covering huge stories, but on the inside, wrestling with a ton of anxiety.
And it all kind of culminated in this, a very public panic attack, right, on live TV.
Oh, yeah, we're going to get into that. It's a wild story. But what's even more interesting is how he goes from this intense skepticism of meditation.
I mean, he literally thought it was only for, bearded swamis or something.
Totally. But then he ends up finding it incredibly helpful, like a surprisingly practical way to quiet that inner critic and find some peace. He wrote all about it in his book, 10% Happier.
His story is so powerful because he comes from this world that's basically the opposite of meditation. Network news, right? Super high pressure, deadlines, constantly on the go. So if you can find a way to make it work, it gives hope to anyone who thinks, meditation, that's not for me.
Exactly. And that's kind of our mission here today, to pull out the most useful bits from Dan's experience. We can all learn from it, see how we can maybe start to manage that voice in the head a bit better, maybe even feel, as Dan puts it, a little 10% happier.
Not a bad goal, right?
Not at all. And the journey to get there, let me tell you, it's a wild ride. I mean, we're talking war zones, mega churches, self-help gurus, even our run-in with Paris Hilton.
Oh, and don't forget the Dalai Lama.
Right. It's a fascinating path, to say the least. Shows you that the search for inner peace can pop up in the most unexpected places.
Definitely.
Okay, so let's rewind to what Dan calls the most humiliating moment of his career. It's June 7th, 2004. He's filling in on Good Morning America. Huge audience, by the way, over 5 million viewers.
Wow. Talk about pressure.
Right. And he's feeling good, got his favorite tie on, ready to deliver the news.
I can't even imagine having a meltdown in front of that many people.
Well, that's exactly what happened. He's reading the second news item, and suddenly, this overwhelming panic just hits him. He describes it as being stabbed in the brain with raw animal fear.
That's a powerful image. Really captures the terror of a panic attack. And for anyone listening who's experienced that, it's not just a little worry. It's like this total loss of control.
Absolutely. And what's crazy is this isn't some rookie reporter. Dan had been working his way up since college. Started in Bangor, Maine, then climbed the ladder all the way to network news.
So he'd paid his dues.
Oh, yeah. And he even admits he loved being on TV, that feeling of validation. Actually, his mom, who he says is super insightful, she once said that anyone who wants to be president must have this inner hole they're trying to fill.
Makes you think about what drives people, right? That need for external recognition.
It's a deep thought. So after this very public meltdown, Dan does what anyone would do. He starts seeing a psychiatrist. But here's the thing. He doesn't initially connect his struggles to his cocaine use.
Even though he had these chest pains, a doctor directly linked to it.
Yeah, it's strange how the mind works, right? Like he's got these physical symptoms, but he's not putting it all together.
That denial can be so powerful, especially with substance use. It's like people trying to manage anxiety or stress with drugs, but then it just masks the real problem. It actually makes things worse.
Right. And it's even crazier because at the time, Dan was considered this prolific correspondent, like killing it professionally.
Wow, so he's excelling in his career while battling this addiction.
Exactly. It fed into this belief that he could fool everyone and keep it all going. But he admits the GMA meltdown was like this huge bottom, a wake-up call he couldn't ignore.
It really shows how addiction can hide behind success. You never know what's going on beneath the surface.
It's true. So after this, Dan's journey takes a kind of unexpected turn. He starts exploring spirituality, though always with that journalist's skepticism, of course.
Of course.
Yeah.
Keep that critical eye.
He spends time in the world of evangelical megachurches, even interviews Pastor Ted Haggard, who at the time was trying to expand the evangelical message beyond the usual social issues.
Interesting. So he's not just jumping into faith blindly. He's analyzing it.
Yeah.
Trying to understand this whole cultural phenomenon.
Exactly. And as you know, later on, this whole scandal breaks involving Haggard.
Yeah, I remember that. It was huge.
And even though Dan's immersed in the news, he's still surprised by it. He sees the hypocrisy, but also this kind of sad human element to it all. It really shows how his path was being shaped by these unexpected encounters and observations.
It makes me think, like, how much are we limiting ourselves by staying in our own little bubble? Maybe we need to engage with things that challenge our comfort zones.
Absolutely, and that's what he keeps doing. Next up, he dives into self-help. Through some mutual friends, he ends up on this blind date with Bianca, who's a doctor. They're total opposites, but she brings this much-needed lightness to his life.
That sounds like a good balance.
It was. But here's the thing. Even with this new relationship, he's still a workaholic. Like, glued to his BlackBerry. Old habits die hard, right?
It's tough to break those patterns. Like,
Hmm.
you should change, but it's easier said than done. It reminds me of that saying, the mind is a wonderful servant, but a terrible master.
Right. And that leads us to his encounter with Eckhart Tolle. Have you heard of him?
Yeah, he's the power of now guy.
And that's him. And the core idea is that the ego is basically fueled by compulsive thought, constantly dwelling on the past, worrying about the future, and totally missing out on the present moment, which Tolle calls the now.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Dan had this realization that he was a total pro at avoiding the present.
And honestly, who isn't to some degree? We're all so busy, so distracted. It's hard to just be.
It really is. But of course, Dan being Dan, he's skeptical of some of Tolle's more out-there claims. Like, is this guy a genius or a bit of a lunatic?
That's the healthy balance, right?
Yeah.
You can be open to new ideas, but still think critically.
Exactly. Then there's Deepak Chopra. Dan meets him in Seattle, and the focus is again on being present, acting with this spontaneous right action. But Dan's noticing how easy it seems for Chopra, and he's also aware of Chopra's massive self-promotion and all the skepticism that comes with that.
It's interesting, right? Like, some of these self-help figures become these larger-than-life personalities. It can be hard to separate the person from the message.
For sure. Dan also spends some time with guys like Joe Vitale and James Arthur Ray, and quickly realizes how empty some of these positive thinking philosophies can be. Tragically, with Ray, it even leads to that disastrous Sweat Lodge retreat.
Oh, wow, I remember hearing about that. It's a stark reminder that not all self-help is created equal. Some of it can be downright dangerous.
Absolutely. But then comes a big turning point. Dan meets Mark Epstein. He presents Buddhism not as religion, but as a practical philosophy. He even calls the Buddha the original psychoanalyst.
I've never thought of it that way.
Right. And he talks about how therapy can help you understand your problems, but it doesn't always provide relief. But with Buddhism, there's this potential for actual relief through the practice.
That's a compelling distinction. So did Dan finally start meditating?
He did. But it wasn't exactly smooth sailing. He talks about these waves of itches, intense fatigue, and a constant stream of thoughts. He compares focusing on his breath to trying to sweep a floor full of cockroaches.
I can relate to that. My mind is always going a mile a minute.
Right. And Dan had spent his whole life avoiding boredom. Now he's forced to face it head on.
That's a tough transition for anyone. But there's this Buddhist analogy that's helpful. The mind is like a waterfall, and mindfulness is the space behind it.
I like that. So you're not trying to stop the waterfall, just create some distance from it. So Dan decides to go all in. He attends a 10-day silent retreat with Joseph Goldstein. Can you imagine going from the chaos of network news to 10 days of complete silence?
Wow, that's quite the contrast.
He was super apprehensive, understandably. Even simple things like walking meditation were confusing at first. And he had this weird issue with excessive saliva.
I've heard that can happen. It's like your body's releasing all this tension you didn't even know you had.
Interesting. But then during a metta meditation, which is all about cultivating loving kindness, he has this breakthrough. He starts picturing his mom, and suddenly he's overwhelmed with emotion, crying, and then this deep sense of happiness.
Wow. It's amazing how powerful these practices can be.
It is, but of course Dan's immediate thought is this bullshit?
That's so relatable. Like, you have this profound experience, and then your mind tries to rationalize it away.
Exactly. And what's great is Goldstein, the retreat leader, is totally unfazed. He's like, yeah, that happens all the time, which actually leads to this whole 10% happier concept.
Meaning, it's not about some sudden enlightenment, but gradual, realistic improvements.
Exactly. They talked about how even feeling 10% better is a huge win, a worthwhile return on the investment of practice.
It's a great way to reframe it. Makes it seem less daunting. So what happened when Dan got back to the real world?
He started trying to apply mindfulness in his daily life. At work, in stressful situations, he also found some unexpected perks to his weekend gig on Good Morning America. and he dove into the research behind it all.
Oh yeah, there's a ton of scientific evidence supporting mindfulness these days.
He mentions John Kabat-Zinn, the MBSR program, even studies showing changes in brain structure from meditation. He tells this great story about his mom, who was initially super skeptical, but then she sees the research and she's like, okay, maybe there's something to this.
That's awesome. Proof that even the most skeptical minds can change.
It's true. Dan also explores this idea of a self-interested case for compassion. Like, being kind actually benefits you, not just the other person. He ties it to the Buddha's teachings about generosity and morality being foundations for meditation. He even saw it in his own father, who found more fulfillment in his mentee's success than his own.
It's like that saying, the best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others.
Right. And then there's the Paris Hilton interview. Dan goes in wanting to ask specific questions about her career, and it gets kind of awkward. Afterward, he's wrestling with whether he was too harsh, It raises this interesting question about how to be mindful and compassionate, even in a competitive environment.
It's a tough balance,
Yeah.
right? You don't want to be a pushover, but you also don't want to be a jerk.
Totally. Later on at ABC, there's a management shakeup, and Dan gets feedback that he needs to be more assertive on the weekend GMA show. He goes back to Mark Epstein for advice, who tells him to hide the zen a little. Don't let people walk all over you, but don't be an asshole either.
That's good advice. It's like mindfulness isn't about being passive. It's about being skillful in how you navigate the world.
Exactly. Epstein also warns about these pitfalls of the path, like some people misinterpret mindfulness as being meek or detached,
Right.
or even nihilistic.
It's important to remember that mindfulness is about being engaged, not checked out.
Totally. So in the end, Dan reflects on his ongoing journey. He talks about a crazy experience in solitary confinement for a story he was working on, and the feedback he gets from Bianca about how he comes across on TV. He emphasizes the research that shows meditation can improve focus, reduce stress, and all that.
And I guess the takeaway is it's not about achieving this perfect state of 100% happy. It's about those small, consistent improvements.
Exactly. Like becoming less reactive, less caught up in your thoughts, and just continuously growing as a person.
It's like a pretty good deal to me.
So what we've learned from Dan Harris, and hopefully from our deep dive today, is that meditation, even just a little bit each day, can make a huge difference. It can help you manage that inner critic, feel a bit more at peace, and maybe even become 10% happier.
And the best part is, it's not some mystical thing. It's like training your brain, a skill anyone can learn.
And for all of you listening who are busy, want to learn efficiently, but also get those aha moments, Dan's story is proof that it's possible. He wasn't some spiritual guru. He was just a regular guy who stumbled upon this powerful tool.
And his journey is still ongoing. It reminds us that working with our minds is a lifelong process.
It really is. So here's a thought for you to chew on. Think about a moment today where that voice in your head was really loud. Maybe it was super critical, or maybe it was just distracting you. How might bringing even a little bit of mindfulness to that moment have changed things?
It's worth considering, right? Maybe try a few minutes of focusing on your breath. It could be the start of your own personal deep dive.
Couldn't agree more.